To my great fellow Americans, I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah. Charlie inspired millions, and tonight, all who knew him and loved him are united in shock and horror. Charlie was a patriot who devoted his life to the cause of open debate and the country that he loved so much, the United States of America. He fought for liberty, democracy, justice, and the American people. He's a martyr for truth and freedom, and there's never been anyone who was so respected by youth. Charlie was also a man of deep, deep faith.
And if you're scared tonight for the country, so are we. Former President George W. Bush put it this way in a statement tonight, saying, quote, "A young man was murdered in cold blood while expressing his political views. It happened on a college campus where open exchange of opposing ideas should be sacrosanct. Violence and vitriol must be purged from the public square, and members of other political parties are not our enemies. They are our fellow citizens."
Okay, stop everything. Just stop. Because what I'm about to tell you is absolutely insane, and I'm not using that word lightly. I'm talking about a moment that was captured on live television, broadcast to millions of people, where the President of the United States may have committed a felony on camera in real time while CNN was rolling. And I know what you're thinking. Come on, another Trump controversy, another outrage. We've heard it all before. But no, this is different. This isn't an accusation based on leaked documents or anonymous sources or something that happened behind closed doors. This is video evidence, clear as day. The president allegedly given an order that violates a federal court injunction, and legal experts are saying this could be obstruction of justice. This could be criminal contempt. This could be the kind of smoking gun moment that actually leads to charges, because it's all right there on tape. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. So here's what happened. October 11th, 2025, Chicago CNN is doing live coverage of the federal courthouse because there's this massive legal battle happening over Trump's immigration crackdown. The president has deployed National Guard troops to Chicago as part of what he's calling an operation to remove criminal illegal immigrants from sanctuary cities. And it's been chaos, mass raids, people getting detained without warrants, families being separated. Civil rights groups are losing their minds, and the courts are trying to step in. A federal judge, Judge Perry, has been hearing arguments about whether Trump's operation is even legal, whether he has the authority to do what he's doing. And on this particular day, Judge Perry issued an injunction, a court order, saying stop, no more raids, not until we figure out if this is constitutional. That's what injunctions do. They pause things while the courts review them. It's a pretty standard legal tool. But here's where it gets wild. CNN's cameras are there. They're broadcasting live from outside the courthouse, and Trump shows up. He's there with DHS agents, with ICE officers, with all these federal law enforcement personnel. And according to multiple witnesses, according to what was caught on camera, Trump tells them to go forward anyway, to ignore the judge's order, to continue the raids, even though a federal judge just explicitly said stop. Even though there's a court injunction in place, Trump allegedly looks at these agents and says, in effect, I don't care what the judge said, do it anyway. And if that's true, if that's what really happened, that's a crime. That's defying a federal court order. That's obstruction of justice. That's potentially criminal contempt. And it happened on live television where everyone could see it. Now, let me be clear about what we're dealing with here. A federal court injunction isn't a suggestion. It's not advice. It's a legally binding order from a judge. And when you violate one, there are consequences. For regular people, violating a court order can land you in jail immediately. Judges don't mess around with contempt. They can lock you up on the spot. No trial, no jury, just straight to a cell until you comply. Now, obviously, it's more complicated when the person violating the order is the president of the United States. You can't just throw the president in jail, but that doesn't mean he's immune. That doesn't mean there are no consequences. It means the legal process is different, more complex, but it still exists. And what Trump allegedly did, giving a direct order to federal agents to defy a court ruling, that's as clear-cut a violation as you can get. That's textbook contempt. That's exactly what the law is designed to prevent. And CNN's legal analyst Laura Coates said it perfectly. She called it unprecedented. A sitting president violating a judge's ruling live on camera. And she said this is a felony level act if prosecutors have the will to pursue it. If prosecutors have the will, that's the key phrase right there. Because the evidence is there, the footage exists, the crime, if it is a crime, happened in front of everyone. So the question isn't whether there's proof. The question is whether anyone is going to do anything about it, whether prosecutors will bring charges, whether the Justice Department will investigate, whether Congress will act, whether the courts will hold Trump accountable, or whether this will be just another outrageous thing that Trump does that everyone talks about for a week and then moves on from. Because that's what usually happens. Trump does something that will end anyone else's career, everyone freaks out for a few days, and then nothing changes, he just keeps going. But this feels different. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this will blow over like everything else. But the fact that it was captured on live television, the fact that there's no ambiguity about what happened, the fact that legal experts from across the spectrum are saying this is serious, that makes me think maybe, just maybe, this time there will be consequences. Because you can't spin video evidence, you can't claim it's fake news when CNN has the footage, you can't say it's a witch hunt when it happened in broad daylight in front of cameras. It's there, it's real, and now the legal system has to decide what to do about it. Do they ignore it? Do they say, well, he's president, so different rules apply? Or do they actually enforce the law and hold him accountable for defying a federal judge? And here's the other piece of this. It's not just about this one moment, it's about what this moment represents. Because Trump has been pushing boundaries since he got back into office, he's been testing how far he can go, how much he can get away with, and every time he does something outrageous and faces no consequences, he gets bolder, he pushes further, and now we're at a point where he's openly defying court orders on live television. What's next? Where does this go? If he can ignore judges, if he can tell federal agents to break the law, what can he do? That's the question that should terrify everyone, regardless of your politics. Because once you establish that the president is above the law, that he can do whatever he wants without consequence, you don't have a democracy anymore. You have something else. And we're dangerously close to finding out what that something else looks like. All right, so let's dig into exactly what happened in Chicago, because the details here are crucial. This isn't just about Trump being Trump. This is about a specific chain of events that legal experts say crosses the line from controversial policy into actual criminal conduct. So let's walk through it step by step. First, the context. Trump has been ramping up immigration enforcement since taking office, but not the normal kind of enforcement. He's been deploying military resources, National Guard troops, to major cities to conduct mass immigration raids, and Chicago has become ground zero for this operation. Chicago is a sanctuary city, meaning local law enforcement doesn't cooperate with federal immigration authorities. They don't hold people for ICE. They don't help with deportations. And Trump hates that. He's been railing against sanctuary cities for years, saying they harbor criminals, that they're protecting dangerous illegal immigrants. So he decided to take matters into his own hands, send in federal agents, send in the National Guard, go door to door if necessary, round up anyone who's here illegally. And look, you can debate the policy merits of that. You can argue about whether sanctuary cities are good or bad. You can discuss immigration enforcement strategy, but what you can't debate is that there are legal limits on what the president can do. There are constitutional protections. There are court orders. And when Trump's Chicago operation started, civil rights groups immediately sued. They said this violates the Fourth Amendment, that you can't just conduct warrantless raids, that you can't deploy military forces for domestic law enforcement, that this is unconstitutional. And they asked for an injunction. They went to federal court and said, Judge, you need to stop this until we can sort out whether it's legal. And Judge Perry, who's overseeing the case, agreed. On October 11th, he issued a preliminary injunction. He said, based on the arguments I've heard, this operation needs to pause. No more raids, no more deployments. Not until we have a full hearing on the constitutional issues. That's a standard legal move. Judges do this all the time when there are serious constitutional questions. So Judge Perry issues this order, and everyone involved is supposed to follow it. The DHS agents, the IC officers, the National Guard troops, all of them, because that's how the legal system works. A judge issues an order and you comply, even if you disagree, even if you think the judge is wrong. You comply first, then you appeal. You don't just ignore it. That's not how this works. But according to multiple witnesses and according to what CNN's cameras captured, Trump didn't see it that way. The footage shows Trump outside the courthouse, surrounded by federal agents, and according to reports, he tells them to proceed with the operation anyway, to ignore Judge Perry's injunction, to go forward with the raids despite the court order. Now, CNN hasn't released the full audio. Some of this is based on witness accounts, but the visual evidence shows Trump clearly giving some kind of directive to these agents right after the injunction was issued. And multiple people who were there say what he told them was, essentially, do it anyway. And that, according to legal experts, is where Trump crossed the line into potential criminal conduct. Because when you knowingly defy a court order, that's contempt. And when you order others to violate a court order, that's obstruction. These aren't minor infractions. These are serious federal crimes. Criminal contempt can carry jail time. Obstruction of justice can carry years in prison. And Trump allegedly did both, on camera, in front of witnesses, at a moment when he absolutely knew there was a court order in place because it had just been issued hours earlier. So there's no argument that he didn't know. There's no claim of ignorance. He knew. And according to witnesses, he ordered agents to violate it anyway. That's mens rea. That's criminal intent. That's exactly what prosecutors look for when they're building a case. Now, Trump's defenders are already spinning this. They're saying he didn't technically violate the order because he's the president and he has executive authority over federal agencies. That immigration enforcement is an executive function, and judges can't micromanage it. That the injunction was overreached by an activist judge. And look, there's a legal debate to be had about the scope of judicial authority versus executive power. But that debate doesn't mean you get to ignore court orders. If you think a judge is wrong, you appeal. You go to a higher court. You ask them to overturn the injunction. What you don't do is just ignore it and hope for the best, because that undermines the entire judicial system. That says court orders are optional if you're powerful enough. And that's not how law works. That's not how democracy works. Even the president, especially the president, has to respect court authority. And here's the thing. Trump has done this before. This isn't his first time defying courts. Remember the travel ban? Courts issued injunctions. Trump's administration kept trying to enforce it anyway. Remember the border wall funding? Courts said he couldn't redirect military money. He did it anyway. Remember all the cases during his first term where judges ruled against him and he just kept pushing? This is a pattern. Trump sees the courts as obstacles to be worked around, not as co-equal branches of government to be respected. And every time he gets away with it, he gets bolder. And now we're at a point where he's openly on camera telling federal agents to defy a judge. And the question is, will anyone stop him? Will prosecutors file charges? Will Congress investigate? Will judges hold him in contempt? Or will everyone just shrug and say, well, that's Trump. What are you going to do? And this is where it gets politically messy, because Trump supporters love this stuff. They see him defying judges as standing up to the system, fighting back against unelected bureaucrats in robes who think they can tell the president what to do. They see this as Trump being strong, being decisive, not letting some liberal judge in Chicago stop him from securing the border and removing criminal aliens. And there's a whole segment of the country that agrees with that thinks Trump is right to push back, that thinks the courts have become too powerful and need to be put in their place. So for them, this isn't a scandal. This is Trump being the fighter they elected him to be. This is exactly what they want. But for everyone else, for people who believe in rule of law, for people who think the courts are an essential check on executive power, this is terrifying. This is watching the president openly defy the judicial branch. This is seeing the separation of powers break down in real time. And the fact that it happened on live television just makes it more surreal, because usually when presidents overstep, it happens behind closed doors. There are memos and meetings and lawyers debating what's legal. But this was public. This was brazen. This was Trump looking at a court order and saying, I don't care, do it anyway. And that should concern everyone. Because if the president can ignore courts when it comes to immigration, he can ignore them on anything. He can ignore them on taxes, on regulations, on criminal investigations, on anything he wants. And at that point, you don't have checks and balances anymore. You have executive supremacy. And that's not what the founders designed. That's not what the Constitution protects. So civil rights attorneys are already calling for investigations. They want the Department of Justice to look into whether Trump's conduct constitutes criminal contempt, whether it's obstruction, whether charges should be filed. But here's the problem. Who investigates the president? The Department of Justice reports to the president. So are they going to investigate their own boss? Probably not, which means it would have to be an independent counsel or Congress or state prosecutors. And all of those options are complicated and politically fraught. But the alternative is doing nothing. The alternative is saying, okay, the president can defy court orders, and that's fine. And once you say that, once you establish that precedent, you can't take it back. It's there forever. And every future president will use it. Every future administration will point to this moment and say, well, Trump did it and nothing happened, so we can too. And the courts will lose their power. And the rule of law will become a suggestion instead of a foundation. And that's what makes this CNN footage so important. Because it's evidence. It's not hearsay. It's not anonymous sources. It's video. It's witnesses. It's a moment captured in time that can't be disputed. And if prosecutors want to build a case, if they want to hold Trump accountable, they have everything they need. The only question is whether they'll do it, whether anyone has the courage to actually enforce the law against the most powerful person in the country. And based on history, I'm not optimistic. But maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. Maybe this time the evidence is too clear, the violation too blatant, the moment too public to ignore. Maybe this is the line that finally can't be crossed without consequence. We'll see. But one thing's for sure, this footage isn't going away. It's out there. It's been seen by millions. And it will be part of the historical record of this presidency. Whether it leads to charges or not, it's there. A moment when the president of the United States allegedly committed a felony on live television. And that's something we'll be talking about for years. Okay, let's break this down into the 3 key takeaways because there's a lot swirling around here and I want to make sure we understand what really matters. First takeaway, this is about the power of visual evidence in the age of live media, and I think this is huge because one of Trump's most effective strategies over the years has been to muddy the waters, to claim fake news, to say things didn't happen the way people claim, to create enough doubt that his supporters don't have to believe his critics. He's a master at that, at taking something that looks bad and spinning it just enough that his base gives him the benefit of the doubt. But that strategy only works when the evidence is ambiguous, when it's documents that can be interpreted different ways, when it's testimony that can be questioned, when it's anonymous sources that can be dismissed. But video, live video, that's different. That's much harder to spin. And that's what CNN has here. They have footage of Trump at the courthouse right after Judge Perry issued the injunction. They have video of him interacting with federal agents. They have witnesses saying he gave an order to proceed despite the court ruling. Now, the audio might not be crystal clear. The exact words might be debated, but the visual narrative is there. The timeline is there. The context is there. And that makes it really hard for Trump to claim this didn't happen. Really hard for him to say the media is lying or making things up because CNN was just broadcasting what was happening. They weren't editorializing in the moment. They were showing what their cameras captured. And what their cameras captured appears to be the president defying a federal court order. That's powerful evidence. The kind of evidence that's very difficult to dispute or dismiss. And in a potential legal case, that kind of video evidence is gold. It's the closest thing to a smoking gun you can get in situations like this. But here's the flip side. Even with clear video evidence, even with witnesses, even with legal experts saying this looks like a crime, will anything actually happen? Because we've been here before. We've seen Trump do things that look clearly illegal or unethical or impeachable, and most of the time, nothing comes of it. He faces no real consequences. Maybe there's outrage for a few days. Maybe Congress holds a hearing. Maybe legal experts write op-eds, but then it fades and Trump just keeps going. So will this be different? Will the visual evidence make a difference this time? Or will this just be another scandal in a presidency full of scandals? I honestly don't know. But what I do know is that the evidence exists, is documented, is public, and that means it can't be completely buried or forgotten. It's part of the record now. And whether it leads to charges next week or next year or in the history books decades from now, it matters. It's there, and it shows what happened. Second takeaway, this crystallizes the conflict between executive power and judicial authority. And this is the constitutional crisis that's been brewing throughout Trump's presidency. Because our system of government is based on separation of powers, 3 co-equal branches. Executive, legislative, judicial, each with their own authority, each able to check the others. That's the theory. That's what's supposed to prevent tyranny. But what happens when one branch just decides to ignore another? What happens when the president says, I don't care what the courts rule, I'm doing what I want anyway? That's the question we're facing. And it's not academic, it's real, it's happening. And what happened in Chicago is a perfect example of this collision. Judge Perry, representing the judicial branch, issued an injunction. He said this operation has to stop while we sort out the constitutional issues. That's his authority as a federal judge. That's what judges do. They interpret the law. They issue rulings. They enforce constitutional protections. And when they issue an order, everyone is supposed to comply. But Trump, representing the executive branch, allegedly ignored that order. He told his agents to proceed anyway. He asserted that his authority as president, his responsibility to enforce immigration law, supersedes what some judge in Chicago says. And that's a direct challenge to the judicial system. That's the executive branch saying, we don't answer to you. We don't have to follow your orders. And if that becomes the norm, if that becomes accepted, then the separation of powers collapses. Because if the president can ignore courts on immigration, he can ignore them on anything. And then the judicial branch becomes irrelevant. Their rulings become suggestions instead of binding orders. And you end up with an all-powerful executive that no one can check. That's authoritarianism. That's not democracy. And this is bigger than Trump. This is about the structure of American government. Because even if you support Trump's immigration policies, even if you think he's right on the merits, the process matters. The way we make and enforce laws matters. If Trump can ignore a court order today on immigration, the next president can ignore a court order tomorrow on something you care about. Maybe gun rights, maybe religious freedom, maybe private property, whatever it is. If we establish that presidents don't have to follow court orders, then no one's rights are safe. Because courts are what protect rights. Courts are what stand between citizens and government overreach. And if courts can't enforce their rulings, if presidents can just ignore them, then we've lost that protection. We've lost that check on power. And that should scare everyone, regardless of politics. Third takeaway, This is a test of prosecutorial courage and institutional integrity. And this might be the most important point of all, because having evidence of a crime is one thing, actually prosecuting it is another, especially when the accused is the President of the United States. Because prosecuting a president is hard, it's politically explosive, it's legally complicated, and it takes courage, real courage, the kind of courage that puts your career on the line, that makes you a target for half the country, that opens you up to accusations of bias and political motivation. And most prosecutors, most investigators, most officials, they don't want that smoke. They'd rather look the other way, let someone else deal with it, focus on cases that aren't going to turn their life upside down. But that's how we got here. That's how Trump has been able to push boundaries for years without facing real consequences. Because at every step, officials have been too scared or too political or too cynical to actually hold him accountable. So he keeps pushing. He keeps testing limits. And now we're at a point where he's allegedly committing crimes on live television. And the question is whether anyone will do anything about it, whether prosecutors will file charges, whether the DOJ will investigate, whether Congress will act, whether judges will hold him in contempt. And based on history, the smart money says no. The smart money says everyone will punt. They'll say it's complicated. They'll say they don't have jurisdiction. They'll say there are separation of powers issues. They'll find some reason to not act. And Trump will skate again. But maybe this time is different. Maybe this time the evidence is too clear. Maybe this time the violation is too blatant. Maybe this time someone somewhere in the system will have the courage to actually enforce the law. To say, no, you don't get to defy court orders on live television without consequence. You don't get to obstruct justice just because you're president. The law applies to you too. And we're going to prove it. That would be huge. That would be precedent setting. That would be a defining moment in American legal history. But it would also require courage, real institutional courage, the kind that's been in short supply lately. So we'll see. We'll see if anyone steps up, if anyone has the guts to actually hold power accountable. And that's where we are. That's the moment we're in. CNN caught Trump on camera allegedly committing a felony, defying a federal court order, telling agents to ignore a judge's ruling. The evidence is there. The legal framework exists. The crime, if it is a crime, happened in front of everyone. So now what? Does the system work? Do laws apply to everyone? Or do they only apply to regular people while the powerful get a pass? This is the test. This is where we find out if American justice is real or if it's just theater, if institutions matter or if they're just props, if rule of law means something or if it's just a phrase we like to say. And honestly, I'm not confident we're going to like the answer, because the evidence suggests that no matter how clear the crime, no matter how blatant the violation, Trump will face no real consequences. He'll keep doing what he's doing, and everyone will just accept it as the new normal. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone will surprise us. Maybe a prosecutor somewhere will actually file charges. Maybe Congress will actually investigate. Maybe a judge will actually hold him in contempt. Maybe the system will actually work the way it's supposed to. I hope so. Because if it doesn't, if nothing happens despite this footage, despite this evidence, despite this moment, then we need to stop pretending we have rule of law in America. We need to stop pretending the Constitution means something. We need to admit that we're in a different place now. A place where power is the only thing that matters. Where laws are suggestions for some people and shackles for others. Where justice depends on who you are, not what you did. And that's not the country I thought we were. That's not the country I want us to be. But that might be the country we're becoming. And moments like this, moments where crimes happen on camera and nothing comes of it, that's how you get there. That's how democracies die. Not with a bang, but with a shrug. With everyone watching something terrible happen and deciding it's not worth the fight to stop it. So yeah, this matters. This footage matters. What happens next matters. And we should all be paying very close attention. Because this is a hinge moment. One way or another, this tells us who we are as a country, and I'm not sure we're ready for that answer.